Before we start with the video, if you want to be named in my next video, please leave a like, subscribe, and write your name in the comment section. Thank you for your support.
Let me start with a question. Have you ever wondered what happens when entire civilizations collide? When faith becomes a sword, when kings become zealots, and when the world's holiest city becomes the center of the deadliest wars of the Middle Ages?
The Crusades weren't just battles. They were shockwaves, a tidal wave of armored knights from Europe crashing into the heart of the Islamic world. And according to historians like Thomas Asbridge and Carol Hillenbrand, they reshaped politics, identity, religion, and memory for nearly 1,000 years. What unfolded between 1095 and 1291 is one of humanity's darkest and most revealing chapters.
Then let's uncover it. But not as a lecture. Let's tell it through the questions people were too afraid to ask, and the answers history refuses to forget. So tell me, what could push tens of thousands of men to abandon their homes, risk disease, starvation, desert heat, and death, just to fight in a land most had never even seen?
It began with fear and opportunity. In 1095, the Byzantine Empire was collapsing under pressure from the Seljuk Turks. Emperor Alexios I begged the West for military support. Pope Urban II seized the moment. At the Council of Clermont, he delivered a speech that, as Jonathan Riley Smith notes, blended religious duty, emotional storytelling, and political ambition. He portrayed Jerusalem as a suffering holy city, Christians as endangered pilgrims, and the Muslims as infidels, blocking the path to salvation.
So he manipulated them.
In part, yes. Urban promised something revolutionary for the time: plenary indulgence, total forgiveness of sins. This wasn't just spiritual, it was psychological power. As Thomas Asbridge explains, many knights were stuck in cycles of violence in Europe. The crusade offered redemption, purpose, and glory. Others sought wealth, land, or a way to escape feudal obligations. The speech created a storm of emotion and desire, and the masses answered.
And ordinary peasants joined too?
Thousands. Some driven by faith, others by desperation. Carol Hillenbrand says that many didn't even understand where Jerusalem geographically was. They simply believed they were walking into God's calling. The result was a religious movement unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen.
But who exactly were these crusaders? Were they disciplined armies?
That's the surprising part. They were not a unified army at all. According to Riley Smith, Crusaders were a chaotic mix. Nobles, knights, monks, peasants, mercenaries, and criminals hoping for forgiveness. Crusade recruitment spread through fiery sermons, church propaganda, and social pressure. Asbridge explains that entire villages sometimes joined because a local priest declared it divine destiny.
So religion was their fuel.
Religion, greed, fear, ambition, it was a cocktail. Knights were drawn to land and honor. Younger sons with no inheritance saw the Holy Land as an opportunity. Peasants hoped for miracles or escape from starvation. Noblewomen even donated fortunes to support the campaigns. The church used symbols like the Red Cross, turning it into a badge of holiness.
But they weren't trained armies.
Not in the beginning. Many had no idea how far Jerusalem was, or how deadly the journey would be. And Amin Maalouf notes that Muslim chroniclers were baffled by how poorly planned the First Crusade was. Armies starved, fell sick, and sometimes disbanded before even seeing battle. But their religious zeal made them terrifyingly persistent.
Let's talk about the Crusader knights themselves. How skilled were they?
European knights were formidable in close combat. From childhood, they trained in horsemanship, swordsmanship, and mounted warfare. John France describes their main advantage: the heavy cavalry charge. Armored knights galloping full speed and crashing into enemy lines could break formations like a hammer breaking stone.
But the Middle East wasn't Europe.
Exactly. The very landscape betrayed them. Their armor overheated in Levantine summers. Their horses struggled in rocky terrain. Muslim cavalry, especially Turkish and Arab horse archers, were faster, lighter, and used hit-and-run tactics. David Nicole explains that Crusaders often tried frontal assaults while Muslims encircled them with arrows.
So how did they live day to day?
Miserably. Crusaders constantly faced thirst, dysentery, malnutrition, and parasites. Asbridge writes entire Crusader armies collapsed before reaching a single battlefield. Many knights sold possessions to survive. Others died from infection after small wounds. Muslim chroniclers like Ibn al-Athir often wrote that nature defeated more Crusaders than the sword.
They must have seemed alien to the local population.
They did. Malouf's sources portray them as loud, unhygienic, and reckless, but also unimaginably stubborn, which made them both terrifying opponents and almost impossible to negotiate with.
I always hear that the First Crusade was chaotic. But what exactly happened before the professional armies even got there?
That chaos was called the People's Crusade, and it was a disaster from the moment it began. Led by a preacher named Peter the Hermit, tens of thousands of untrained peasants, women, children, and wanderers marched east months before the knights were ready. Thomas Asbridge emphasizes that the church never intended them to be the actual army. They were swept up by hysteria, a religious mass movement, not a strategy.
So they fought without weapons or training.
Exactly. Their army was a mob. Many died in the Balkans from hunger or local wars. Even worse, several groups committed horrific pogroms against Jewish communities in the Rhineland, especially in Worms, Mainz, and Cologne. Historians like Jonathan Riley Smith and Robert Chazan document these massacres extensively. The People's Crusade arrived in Anatolia exhausted, starving, and completely unprepared for real warfare.
And the Muslims must have been confused.
Utterly. According to Amin Malouf's interpretation of Muslim chroniclers like Ibn al-Athir, the Seljuks viewed them not as soldiers, but as a crowd of madmen. When they finally confronted Turkish forces at Civitat in 1096, they were annihilated almost instantly. Nearly all were killed or sold into slavery. It was the grim prologue of the Crusades, showing how fanaticism without strategy leads to catastrophe.
Everyone talks about Jerusalem, but isn't Antioch just as important?
In many ways, yes. The Siege of Antioch, 1097 to 1098, was one of the most brutal and desperate episodes of the entire Crusades. As Asbridge describes, the Crusaders became trapped between the massive walls of the city and the approaching relief armies of the Turks. Months passed with famine, disease, and freezing weather tearing through their ranks. Knights ate their horses. Some resorted to cannibalism, a fact confirmed by multiple sources, including Ralph of Caen.
How did they finally take the city?
By betrayal. A Christian armor maker inside Antioch named Firuz agreed to let the Crusaders scale the walls during the night. This single act turned the tide. But the moment they stormed Antioch, a massive Muslim relief army under Kerboga arrived, trapping the Crusaders inside the very city they had just captured. Panic spread like wildfire. It seemed the crusade would end there.
And yet they won. How?
Through a mixture of luck, desperation, religious zeal, and Kerboga's political miscalculations. When a monk claimed to discover the Holy Lance, morale soared. Whether it was real or fabricated is still debated by historians. But inspired, the Crusaders charged out against overwhelming odds. And against expectation, Kerboga's coalition fractured. The Crusaders won, securing Antioch and proving that they were not just pilgrims, but a hardened military force.
Let's go to the most infamous moment, the capture of Jerusalem in 1099. What really happened?
It was shocking even to medieval standards. When the Crusaders breached Jerusalem's walls in July 1099, they massacred thousands of Muslims and Jews. Ibn al-Athir, al-Qalanisi, and Christian chroniclers such as Raymond of Aguilera all report the same. The streets ran with blood. Some later texts exaggerate the numbers, but historians agree the slaughter was immense. No one was spared: women, children, worshippers, the elderly.
And what drove them to such brutality?
Two things: religious extremism and months of starvation and suffering. To them, it was divine vengeance. According to Asbridge, many believed they were instruments of God's wrath. The Crusaders had endured desert marches, disease, and starvation. When the city finally fell, their anger and fanaticism exploded.
What happened to the survivors?
Many were enslaved. Others fled to cities like Damascus or Egypt. Muslim chroniclers recorded the event as a horror without precedent. It ignited a deep wound that Saladin and later Muslim leaders would use as a rallying cry for centuries. Jerusalem became not just a city, but a symbol of trauma, faith, and revenge.
Now, the key question. Who exactly was Saladin? Why does he stand out so much?
Saladin was extraordinary because he united what had been a fragmented Muslim world. Born into Crete in 1137, raised in Damascus, and trained in the military household of Nur ad-Din, he learned strategy, politics, and diplomacy. According to Carol Hillenbrand and Amin Maalouf, Saladin was not originally seen as a great warrior, but he grew into one through discipline and vision. He became Sultan of Egypt, then Syria, creating a united front against the Crusader states.
What made him different from earlier Muslim leaders?
Two things: unity and mercy. Muslim chroniclers widely praised his justice, piety, and generosity. Even Christian writers like William of Tyre admired him. Saladin resisted unnecessary killing, negotiated when needed, and tried to avoid civilian suffering. This stood in stark contrast to many Crusader massacres. His diplomacy was as powerful as his sword.
And militarily?
He was a master. Saladin reorganized armies, improved logistics, and used light cavalry to exhaust the Crusaders. He avoided fighting on their terms and forced them to fight on his. His long-term goal was clear: reclaim Jerusalem. Everything he built, alliances, resources, strategy, aimed at that single target. And in 1187, everything would converge at Hattin.
Let's jump to the big moment, Hattin. Why is this battle always described as the end of the Crusader dream?
Because it was the moment Saladin shattered the military backbone of the Crusader states. According to historians like Thomas Asbridge, Malcolm Barber, and Carol Hillenbrand, the Crusaders marched out in July heat with little water, pressured by King Guy of Lusignan and the Templar Grand Master Gerard of Riedfort. Saladin lured them away from reliable water sources toward the volcanic plateau of Hattin. His strategy was brilliant: cut off water, harass constantly with archery, and allow the heat to break their morale.
So they walked right into a trap?
A perfect one. Chroniclers such as Ibn al-Athir and Imad ad-Din al-Isfahani describe the Crusaders as exhausted, dying of thirst, and blinded by smoke from burning dry grass, ignited deliberately by Saladin's forces. When the Crusaders collapsed around the Horns of Hattin, Saladin unleashed his cavalry. The true cross, Christianity's most sacred relic, was captured. The king, most nobles, and the entire military leadership of the kingdom fell into his hands.
And that opened the road to Jerusalem?
Exactly. With no field army left, every city except Tyre surrendered rapidly. Hattin wasn't just a defeat, it was the collapse of a system. Karen Armstrong and Amin Maalouf both emphasized that Muslim morale surged, seeing it as divine justice after the massacres of 1099. It was the greatest Muslim victory of the Crusades.
After Hattin, how did Saladin retake Jerusalem? Was it as brutal as 1099?
Quite the opposite. When Saladin besieged Jerusalem in September 1187, its defense was led by Balian of Ibelin. Unlike 1099, the Muslim forces offered terms repeatedly. As Hillenbrand and Maalouf highlight, Saladin wanted the city, but not the bloodshed. Balian threatened to destroy Jerusalem and kill every Muslim prisoner if no terms were given. Saladin responded with mercy: safe passage for all, ransoms set low, and many freed without payment.
So this time, there was no massacre?
None. Muslim chroniclers praise Saladin's compassion. Christian writers, including Ernul and the Chronicle of Ernul, confirm it. Families were allowed to leave peacefully. Religious sites were respected. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa were cleansed and rededicated, but the population was not harmed. It was a deliberate contrast to 1099, a moment of moral and political symbolism.
And what did this mean historically?
It reshaped Saladin's reputation for centuries. Even Europe admired him. Dante placed him among the virtuous pagans. This act of mercy cemented his legacy as a chivalrous leader, not a butcher.
What happened when Europe responded? Richard the Lionheart is often portrayed as Saladin's equal.
Richard was indeed one of the greatest warriors of the Middle Ages. According to John Gillingham and Thomas Asbridge, he was bold, aggressive, and tactically brilliant. After capturing Acre, he marched down the coast and won a major victory at Arsuf, where disciplined infantry held against Muslim cavalry. Yet Richard could not break Saladin's logistical superiority or force him into a decisive battle.
So, were they enemies or rivals?
Both, but with a foundation of respect. Muslim sources like Ibn Shaddad describe Saladin's admiration for Richard's courage, while Western chroniclers speak of Richard respecting Saladin's honor and restraint. They traded gifts, exchanged medical assistance, and negotiated constantly. But neither could deliver the final blow. Saladin could not destroy the Crusaders at the coast, and Richard could not retake Jerusalem.
How did it end?
In 1192, they signed the Treaty of Jaffa. Christians retained coastal cities, Muslims kept Jerusalem, and pilgrims could enter safely. It was a diplomatic masterpiece showing mutual respect and strategic realism.
What was everyday life like in the Crusader states? Just constant war?
Surprisingly, no. Historians like Christopher Tierman and Jonathan Riley Smith show that the Crusader states were not non-stop battlefields. They were multicultural societies where Latin Christians, Greek Orthodox, Muslims, Jews, and Armenians lived under shared laws and trade. Ports like Acre were cosmopolitan centers full of merchants, pilgrims, travelers, and diplomats.
So there was coexistence?
Yes, but unequal. Muslims often paid higher taxes and had fewer rights, yet, contrary to stereotypes, they were not always persecuted. Many villages remained fully Muslim. Islamic courts operated in rural areas. Arabic was widely spoken. Crusaders adopted Middle Eastern clothing styles, food, and architecture. They learned Arabic medicine and traded with Muslim neighbors despite wars.
That's more complex than the usual narrative.
History always is. The Crusader states were hybrid societies, part European, part Middle Eastern, shaped by conflict but also exchange.
What about the famous Knight Orders? How were they trained?
The Templars and Hospitallers were elite, disciplined, and extremely well-trained. Malcolm Barber and Helen Nicholson describe strict rules: daily prayer, silence during meals, communal living, no personal property, and constant physical conditioning. Training included swordsmanship, lance work, formation combat, horse maneuvering, and endurance in armor under extreme heat.
What set them apart from other knights?
Professionalism. They were full-time soldiers, unlike most knights who fought only seasonally. They had advanced logistics, fortifications, medical care, and war horses. Their discipline was feared by Muslim chroniclers like Usama ibn Munkid, who wrote that they fought with shocking resilience.
But they weren't invincible.
Correct. Their rigidity sometimes became a weakness. At Hattin, for instance, many Templars died because Ridefort refused strategic withdrawal. Great warriors, but still human.
How did Crusader armies actually fight?
Crusaders relied on heavy cavalry, armored knights whose charge could smash enemy lines. But Muslim forces under the Seljuks, Zengids, and Ayyubids used mobility, horse archers, feigned retreats, and hit-and-run tactics. Scholars like David Nicole show that Crusader armies often struggled in open plains, but excelled in close combat or sieges.
What about weapons?
Crusaders used long swords, heavy spears, kite shields, maces, and crossbows. Muslims countered with composite bows, curved swords, light spears, and fast cavalry. Siege warfare was dominated by mangonels, trebuchets, battering rams, and mining tunnels. Many battles were decided by fatigue, water supply, and terrain rather than pure strength.
So the two sides fought very differently.
Completely. The Crusades were a clash of military cultures, one heavy and shock-based, the other mobile and ranged. Each side learned from the other over time.
After Saladin and Richard, what happened? The Crusades didn't end there, right?
They continued, but gradually declined. The Fourth Crusade, 1204, infamously sacked Constantinople instead of fighting Muslims, an event documented extensively by Nicetas Choniates. Later crusades failed due to poor planning, lack of unity, and shifting European priorities. Egypt became the main target, but invasions repeatedly collapsed.
Did Muslims grow stronger?
Yes, the Mamluks under Baybars and later Qalawun and al-Ashraf Khalil systematically dismantled the remaining Crusader states. By 1291, Acre fell, ending the Crusader presence in the Levant. Muslim chroniclers celebrated it as the final victory in a long, holy war.
So the Crusades just faded away?
More or less, Europe lost interest, politics changed. The age of Crusaders was over.
What's the lasting impact of the Crusades today?
Massive. They shaped Christian-Muslim relations for centuries. As Armstrong and Malouf emphasize, the Muslim memory of the Crusades is largely shaped by the massacre of Jerusalem in 1099 and the trauma of repeated invasions. European memory, on the other hand, often romanticized Crusaders until modern times.
So the two sides remember the same events differently.
Completely differently. For Muslims, the Crusades were foreign invasions. For Europeans, they were holy missions or medieval adventures. Modern scholarship, Asbridge, Hillenbrand, France, emphasizes that both narratives were shaped by later politics.
And today?
The legacy remains powerful. Many modern political speeches misuse Crusade history, but historians stress nuance. It was a complex era of violence, coexistence, exchange, and cultural transformation.
So after everything we've covered, the wars, betrayals, alliances, atrocities, and acts of mercy, what do the Crusades ultimately teach us?
That history is never black and white. It's a story of politics, faith, ambition, suffering, and human nature. And understanding it helps us understand ourselves. If you want more deep, fact-based history told without bias, subscribe and follow.